Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conch Productions Artist Chat Special Edition, CSIFF and Karukerament Podcast Series. I'm Magaly Colimon-Christopher. I am the Artistic Director of Conch Productions and the host of this amazing conversation. Maëlla Kancel, my co-host, had this amazing idea for this series to bring together artists and intellectuals who are fully versed in the Caribbean cinema conversation. And so we decided to host Caribbean cinema then and now. And I'd like to introduce you to Maëlla Kancel, founder of Karukerament Podcast.
Thank you so much, Magaly. So I'm so excited for this conversation. We are deeply invested in exploring Caribbean cinema, Caribbean music, and Caribbean identity. This topic, Caribbean cinema then and now, sits right at the heart of that work. And we're honored to be joined today by two incredible scholars.
Rachel Moseley-Wood, and I am a senior lecturer in the Department of Literatures and English at the University of the West Indies, Mona in Jamaica. And I teach mainly film studies courses, and I have participated in the introduction and development of film programs. Most recently, we've introduced an undergraduate program in screenwriting. So there's a lot of interest in film. There's also a film production program offered at UWI Mona, and a lot of interest in screenwriting. So as we try to meet the needs of our students, we're seeing that film is somewhere that they want to go.
So exciting.
I was thinking that that's like really more than an introduction, but
I love it. I love it.
I'm Guillaume Robillard. I'm from Guadeloupe. I was born and raised in Guadeloupe. That's why I worked on. I'm a lecturer at Panthéon-Sorbonne, where I did my research, and also at the French West Indies University. I'm also a director for documentaries, and I'm also the programming director of a film festival in Guadeloupe, the FEMI.
When you think about Caribbean cinema then and now, which is our topic, what feels like, how would I say, the most significant shift in how Caribbean stories are told on screen then and now?
I feel like what's a major difference is the kinds of tools that filmmakers have at their disposal now. A lot of my research has now shifted to film produced in Jamaica and other parts of the Anglophone Caribbean during the colonial period. And when you look at some of the records about, how film had to be made in the 1950s, in the 1960s, very difficult, very, very expensive. Now, I think more and more people and more young people are becoming interested in film and in using film to tell stories. And I think that, like a major difference now is just how the technology is making film more accessible as a way of telling our Caribbean stories, making it more democratic because, more people can participate in that.
Yeah, so I totally agree with the fact that nowadays it's very easier to make movies than in the 90s, 80s, and before. In Guadeloupe and Martinique, you also have, of course, the colonial period. I will talk about the period after the colonial status when French Caribbean directors make films themselves. I would say that the biggest difference between the beginning of the French Caribbean cinema and nowadays is the fact that during the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the films had very political issues, very frontal political issues. One of the main subjects was the question of the status, about autonomy or independence. I would say silent struggle between the French state and the French Caribbean directors, because of course the French state didn't have a personal interest to give money through public funds. I would say more a third generation understood that they had to talk about political issues through social issues, contemporary issues. And I think that it makes a quite different way to write and tell stories and make films.
The difference that we hear from Rachel and from Guillaume is in the French Caribbean side, we are really focused on telling our struggles and talking about social issues. So the narrative is really serious. So I was wondering, because cinema is something that you create, the films are made to be watched. So I was wondering if there was a shift in the audience in Jamaica and in the audience in the way people go to the movies to watch films made by local directors.
What I feel has happened in the Anglophone Caribbean, and I speak mainly about Jamaica. That's where I'm located. That's where I've done a lot of my research. And I think that in Jamaica, if we can date the emergence of local feature filmmaking from the 70s, and what we saw in the films that came, 1972 in Jamaica, The Harder They Come. This was 10 years after independence, after the 70s, was certainly a concern with political issues. That period of radical politics, leftist politics, and so on. So I feel like the films that we produced post 1970s were political. They address political issues, but always in ways that you could retain and build an audience. So I would say that they were not so dark, right? That that there was always this kind of concern, saying things, but saying it in a way that you built an audience, and you were concerned with numbers, with the audience coming in to watch the film. That concern with the audience may be due to the fact that in our film industry in Jamaica, we have never really had that state support, right? It's always independent producers that have had to seek funding on their own.
I've fallen in love with Jamaican Brit cinema and theater. As a matter of fact, I thank Winsome Pinoke, a Jamaican Brit playwright, for making me feel that there is a space for my voice as a Haitian American as opposed to as an American writer. Do you feel that what you shared about the native Jamaican film community is similar in Great Britain, or do you feel as though their access to public funding has freed them to be, quite frankly, as rebellious as can be?
Yeah, I feel like there have been periods where, Caribbean diaspora filmmakers in Britain have had access to funding. And I really feel like that is key in terms of creating and providing a freedom for filmmakers to say what they want to say, and in ways that they want to say it, right? It just frees them, I think, from thinking about how many people will come in to see this film. So yeah, I think that is so.
So commercialism versus art.
Yeah.
Basically.
Do you feel that in Martinique and Guadeloupe, because the French government does fund, that there's less of an interest in commercialism, like less of an interest in perhaps putting subtitles in films so that people everywhere in the world can hear their story? Is there a leaning towards commercialism now more so than there was then?
Guadeloupe and Martinique are still French departments. They have different status. And in the French system, you ask money to the French state to make films and to some private funds, but most of the money comes from the public system. So that's a very big difference between the system in the Anglophone Caribbean islands and the Francophone Caribbean islands, for instance. I think that for the first generation of French Caribbean directors, as these islands are French departments, there was kind of urge to talk about the question of the status. about autonomy, or even about independence. So I think that the first generation of directors like Christian Lara, who made the first French Caribbean film, Coco la Fleur Candidat, Coco la Fleur Candidate, didn't really think enough about commercializing and about the public. And then I think that this first generation understood that they could have a huge public in Guadeloupe and Martinique. We're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And in the French Caribbean diaspora, but not enough to continue to make films. Nowadays, we have a third generation who understood that they have to find a bigger public, not only in France, but everywhere in the world, thanks to platforms, for instance. So their films are less political, as I said, even if you still have very political issues. They deal more with social issues, and they make comedy or thrillers, things like that, to think about different audiences everywhere in the world. And I think that the first generation didn't think enough about that, not because they were not clever, because there was a kind of political struggle they had to make. So nowadays, we can talk about French Caribbean cinema, which is in a logic of commercializing in France and everywhere else.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Filmmaking doesn't exist in a vacuum. As I guess we could say that of any kind of art form, but particularly filmmaking, which requires these kinds of economic or financial inputs. Where we are today as societies, much more globally connected, much more tapped into and thinking about markets. I think that maybe that has just become, like more of our thinking that now, we have all these platforms that, we can reach these global markets, and that really informs, I guess, how filmmakers think about making films and what it is they want to do. A lot of young people interested in making films now talk about content instead of film. So it's a whole different way of thinking, when we think of then and when we think of now.
Thank you.
As I was listening to your answers, I was wondering how important was cinema in shaping ideas of nation and belonging for Jamaica and for the French Caribbean.
The French Caribbean cinema is very focused on the question of identity. And from that point of view, it's a kind of national cinema. And with the first films, Coco la Fleur Candidat, Mamito, Vivre libre ou mourir, Rue Casse-Nègre, you really had this obsession, I would say, about identity. In these films, the directors needed to talk about culture, identity, and the fact that you have a specific past, colonial past, in these parts of the world, beginning of the 80s. You had more than 100,000 people going to watch some films in small islands where you had, I would say, 300,000 people. So that was really huge for these territories because people really needed to watch themselves on screen. The young generations have a way to watch films coming from everywhere. They don't have this need as much as the previous generations. The new directors make their films in a different way.
If I think about the role that film and cinema have played in nation, I would say in the English-speaking Caribbean, it has been huge. A lot of my work now has moved more from contemporary film and looking at the kind of role that cinema has played in the colonial period. And, it's a kind of pet peeve of mine that we have not given more attention in the Anglophone Caribbean to the role that films have played in building an awareness of nation. So even in the colonial period, we were certain of the English-speaking colonies, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana, had film units that were making films. And a lot of those films were really seeking to build, even though it was a colonial period, but were seeking to build an awareness of nation and national identity. But the point is that they were instrumental in contributing to this idea of who you were as a Jamaican or who you were as a Bajan. And maybe that idea of who you were was colonially inflected, but that is what we had at that time. And those films were really very widely circulated within each of the islands. So I think that historically, film has had that very important role. I think that today and in a more contemporary period, there are so many other influences that I don't think that film, has that really critical role in terms of building a sense of national identity. Today, we have all of these different platforms. We have access to so many different films and so much content, as I would say, that maybe it is not that important now for people to see, as I say, see themselves on the screen.
Thank you so much. So do you feel that the Guadeloupean and the Martinican audiences were also receptive to films from Haiti? Because I'm sure they were receptive to films from France, but their sister island, or did they feel like I only want to see films from our community and other communities are not of interest? Was there a certain resistance to those stories?
I would say that there are not so many links between the French Caribbean islands and other French-speaking areas in the world. When I was younger, I could watch some films from Senegal or Cameroon or Haiti, but only in very specific film festivals. So it was quite difficult to watch that kind of films in everyday life. You don't have that kind of connections. And I would say that last 5 or maybe 7, 8 years, Guadeloupean and Martinican professionals began to create links or to recreate links with Africa. So they're trying to make projects in that way, but it's very, very recent.
So focusing on digital platforms, present tense, future tense, where are we going with this cinema? I'm still being asked by people, what exactly is Caribbean film? Right? And that's a very good question because when you think about these platforms that are showing these films, who's actually writing them? How have they changed the visibility of the Caribbean heritage filmmaker?
What makes a Caribbean film? There's so many things that go in there. And, like one of the things I said earlier was that the new technology makes access to the tools to make films more democratic. It's more accessible. The point is that with all of these different platforms, I don't even know if I'm seeing everything. It's hard to kind of keep check of what it always was, but it's still difficult to keep check of what there is. For me, when I think about what constitutes a Caribbean film, I think I'm going to say, yes, Caribbean people need to be involved, but is that Caribbean people resident in the region or Caribbean people who consider themselves part of the diaspora? I think that a Caribbean film needs to adopt a kind of local perspective.
When the first French Caribbean directors made their films, we really had to think about this question of a Caribbean identity of films. We're talking about the English colonial system. In the French colonial system, and there are different several points, you had, I will say, almost no films about the French Caribbean identity, the identity of the majority of the African descent population of Guadeloupe or Martinique. So the first films in which you could have that question of culture and identity was in the 70s. I think that the new generation, they have to think their films at an international scale, and at the same time define or keep their specificities, not being too particular, but not being too universal at the same time. So local and global at the same time. I think that's really the new period, the new phase of this cinemas.
As two diaspora babies, Maëlla, you and I. So when you're thinking about Caribbean cinema, are you thinking Caribbean heritage, which is diaspora and native? What are your thoughts that come to mind when you think about Caribbean cinema?
Well, I think about Caribbean cinema as stories set within the Caribbean community, whether it's in the region or somewhere else in the world. So to me, it's really about the people and not so much about the location. I mean, what's really important to me, it's to learn about all the ways to be Caribbean, to broaden my perspective of what Caribbean identity is. Earlier, you talked about if in Guadeloupe and Martinique, we got to watch film from Haiti or other countries that were colonized by France, we didn't have that much accessibility. I mean, what's important to me right now is being able to watch film that were made in Jamaica or Trinidad in the 70s, in the 80s, as well as the new films that we get to see on digital platforms. I think that's something that other cultures don't really have to think about. It's really hard to get to the Caribbean then. And to me, if we only get to know about Caribbean cinema through contemporary narratives, then we cannot get the full spectrum of what Caribbean identity is.
I really appreciated what you shared. And as we bring this conversation to a close, what would that phrase be that you would impart upon current and future Caribbean heritage filmmakers when they're thinking about their place in this cinema world?
A big part of French Caribbean films still nowadays can't be seen by the professionals making films. So I think they should try to know what has been before them, because in the French Caribbean cinema, for instance, the first directors were very smart. They found very specific characters. You have the Creole storyteller, very, very important. You have the Maroons, of course. You have a kind of magical realism we can find in different Caribbean islands, you know. The new generation should try to make a mix between these specificities. They, in fact, do not know, they do not know that work made before them, and their own subjects and their own themes, their own desires.
I would say to them, look past Hollywood. Do not try in the stories you tell with film to replicate what's coming out of Hollywood. So I would really love to see filmmakers in the Caribbean telling stories that feel true to them, that say something about their experience, about the experience of their communities in ways that speak to that truth, right? So, use Creole, use patois. Don't try to temper that because another audience might not understand. Think of ways of telling these stories that resonate with our cultural heritage. Be adventurous, be bold, be confident, and tell stories in ways that resonate with our cultural heritage, with our physical environment, with our history.
Fantastic. Thank you. Can I also add, please use subtitles so that you can hit the world? Seriously, you can be showing
Sure.
if you have Portuguese subtitles, open up the framework because the world wants our voice,
Yeah. Subtitles, sure, fine.
What excites you most about the future of Caribbean cinema?
In the English-speaking Caribbean, and I'm going to say particularly in Jamaica, because we don't have that access to funding, what's happening now is that more and more filmmakers are making films, but they're making short films. So we're seeing a lot of short films, but not very many new features. Part of me also wants to be optimistic and to say that, more people are coming to this medium to tell their stories, and maybe something new and something really fresh and exciting will emerge within this new space that is dominated by short film.
People think that good films are long films, and they don't really take the time to really appreciate, to really enjoy short films. And with the pandemic in 2020, we realized that people just consumed a lot of short formats. Nowadays, it's really about, TikTok and short videos. So of course, it's always nice to have a long story, a long film. But the way people consume films right now has changed. And I think Caribbean cinema was pioneer in that way, just to create short films, short, impactful films. We should definitely develop also that aspect, because it can bring more money, and more money means more fundings for longer films. But we shouldn't give up on short films.
I think that what is very exciting about the future Caribbean cinema, French Caribbean cinema, is that nowadays, as you said, people watch movies in different way on platforms. And I think that what platforms, I would say, gave us is that today people from all around the world are ready to watch films with subtitles. We have to remember that I would say 10 years ago or 20 years ago, very few people were ready, to watch films with subtitles. So that's a way to bring the Creole languages, languages from minorities in short films, in feature-length films, extra. So that's a very good point. I think about of course, the feature-length film Zion, which was quite a success in France last year, Zion by Nelson Foy. And you had a lot of Creole in this film. And you had an audience in France, which was not only people linked to the French Caribbean islands, or Creole-speaking people. So that's a very important point. So I think that considering all our stories, we never told to people, to everybody, I would say, in films, stories from the past, from let's say the traditional Creole tales, a lot of things. So we have a lot of things to share with people through films, and we have that opportunity to put again a lot of Creole in films. And at the same time, I think that what is important is that the most recent films in the French Caribbean cinemas in Guadeloupe or Martinique, or films made mainly in France, or as you said, everywhere else. The diaspora in France began to make films at the same time as French Caribbean people in Guadeloupe and Martinique at the end of the 70s. And in the most recent films, everywhere in the world, I would say that the characters have more psychology. They are more individuals than in the former films, where we had to have heroes fighting for the community, but not being individuals. So that mix between the specific cultural specificities and that kind of individuals, the characters which are individuals, which are more and more individuals, I think that, we have nice opportunities for tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this enlightening, rich, expansive conversation. And I mean, when we're dialoguing about Caribbean cinema, it's not just evolving, it's like, as you said, actively shaping, reshaping identity and the understanding of identity. As you said, Rachel, understanding what our strengths are, you know, do those short films. Yeah, it's not great, but do them. Get the content out. So I want everyone listening to keep on watching this video, share it with your people, and thank you for joining tonight. Stay in touch with Conch Productions and Karukerament Podcasts, and there are going to be a lot more conversations, but more importantly, we have our film festival. We're accepting submissions until July 1st. Submit your short film because this is a short film festival. I want to thank you all for attending our film festival October 9th to 11th in New York City, in Queens, New York. So if you can't submit a film, come to the film festival. And that is the most amazing ending for an amazing conversation. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Guillaume. Thank you, Maëlla. And good night to you all. Keep telling your stories, please.